Okay, I think we've got most of our folks rolled in. So I am Ty Edwards. I'm a member of the Executive Committee of Women for Kansas. Welcome to our How Are Federal Policy Changes Impacting Kansas Women for Kansas webinar town hall. So thank you for being with us. If you're not familiar with Women for Kansas, you can learn more about us at womenforkansas.org. Our mission is to recruit, motivate, and educate women and all Kansans to actively participate in the process of electing moderates to public office who will advocate for moderate policies. We also do a lot of work on educating ourselves and others in Kansas, especially voters and community members, about how policies are impacting us, people running for office, all kinds of things related to politics in Kansas. Again, you could go to womenforkansas.org to learn more about us, to subscribe to our newsletter. You, of course, can also support us with your funds. We appreciate memberships because things like Zoom, of course, have an expense, and we appreciate that support. This is a recorded event, and we are going to post it on our YouTube channel after it's complete. So you should feel free to go to our YouTube channel to see lots of different content related to Women for Kansas work all across the state. We have chapters all across the state and virtual chapters and events like this that we hope can bring in lots of people from across the state. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dena Morse from Women for Kansas, who's going to tell you a little bit more about who we're going to be hearing about today. So Adina, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Ty. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on a Monday evening. There are two goals for this evening, and the first is for our panelists to educate Kansans on how federal policy changes are impacting us here at home. And the second is to share this information and participant questions with our congressional delegation and their staffs. This idea came about because we were frustrated at our inability to reach our elected representatives, and so we thought we would put something together, and also because I hope you learn from our panelists today and get some information, because in my world, information helps quell uncertainty. So that is our two stated goals. We do have panelists, and I will introduce them. Ty, I think you have the next screen so that we're going to let them
Yeah, I
speak.
also want to, do you want to talk a little bit about congressional delegates?
Oh, I do. Yeah, let's talk about this. Okay, so congressional delegation, everybody that you see on the screen was invited by me repeatedly. I made phone calls, I sent emails, I contacted schedulers, and I have the, as they say, receipts. So I think it is important to know that I reached out to every single one of our elected representatives. I encouraged them to be here, and if they couldn't be here, to send a staff person who could at least take the information back to their boss. And nobody's here from our delegation in Washington. Make of that what you will. All right, but we do have some fabulous panelists, and they will go in this order, and I'm just going to introduce them, and then Ty, pardon me, is going to moderate that piece. So our panelists, we have Suzanne Wikle from Kansas House District 10. We have Brooklyn Mosley from Kansas House District 46. We have Marci Francisco, Kansas Senate District 2. We have Angie Powers from the Kansas National Education Association. And we have her colleague Brian Skinner, also from Kansas National Education Association. We have Dena Sattler, U.S. military veteran, and somebody I worked a little bit with this summer in some elections, and she's a pretty awesome person. We may have Jay Moyer, LGBTQ plus activist. They may join us at some point. We have Jessica Cooney from the Just Food Pantry in Douglas County. And we have Christy Davis, who is a rural Kansas development person currently sitting in rainy Philadelphia and kind enough to join us on this night. So that's who we have. I think it's a good lineup. Somebody said earlier when we were doing this, we could have 50 panelists and 50 questions and we wouldn't touch it all. But we wanted to give you some substance and hopefully some information this evening. So thank you.
All right, Suzanne, we're going to have you start us off. And I do want to tell everybody that while you're listening, we are going to spend time doing Q&A. So if you have questions for any of our panelists, put them in the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of your screen on your Zoom screen. And feel free to put those in at any time, and we will try to get to as many as we can by the end. So Suzanne, take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you so much to Women for Kansas for hosting this tonight and for all of those that have tuned in on Monday evening to listen to us talk. So I hope that there's lots of questions. I'm going to kick us off a little bit thinking about some local impacts that are starting to be felt from federal cuts, and then talk more about what is potentially on the horizon, given what is still pending in Congress. So and just quickly, I'm Suzanne Wikle, House District 10, which is one of the state representative House districts in Lawrence. So a couple of things that I know of that we've already been feeling locally, and I think I don't have a full grasp of it, but this is what I know. One obviously is job loss. So the federal government is a huge employer in the Kansas City area. It's also a big employer in the Lawrence area. When we just look at, what happened with Haskell initially and the job losses there, I have friends who work at HUD in Kansas City, who are on edge about what may happen at CMS in Kansas City, on edge about what may happen. And so I think just the top line there is job loss, and that kind of feeds into like all of the other repercussions that we will see. Another thing that I've had some recent conversations with is the impact potentially the Boys and Girls Club of Lawrence is facing. So I think just in general, most people don't understand how many federal grants flow into states and support programs like the Boys and Girls Club or food pantries or other social service programs, childcare programs. Like, there is a lot of federal money that generally comes into states to support these programs. And so when we look at the elimination or threat of elimination of many of these grants, it really is devastating. So just like a quick overview of what the Boys and Girls Club of Lawrence is facing. So one, for context setting, in Lawrence, the Boys and Girls Club serves about 40% of all students in 497, and that's primarily through their before and after school care program, which my child utilizes. It's a great program. It helps families stay in the workforce. It's a really, really great program. But looking at their federal funding streams and where they are concerned, they're looking at potentially cuts that would affect 75% of their part-time workforce, 60% of their full-time unit directors, and 50% of their social emotional counselors. So we're really talking about major cuts that could potentially really devastate a program and or make them look for other resources, which would come from more local community, which when everybody's doing that, it puts a burden, and it's not something that we can always just replace by charity or donations across all of these various needs, because the magnitude is just that large. Cuts, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about the potential of, given what is on the horizon in Congress. So for those of you who may not be fully up to speed, Congress is debating some budget changes, huge budget changes right now, through what's called the reconciliation process. And through that, there are really significant cuts on the table, and I'm going to talk about two of those. One, I'm going to talk about Medicaid cuts that are on the table, and then a little bit about SNAP, which is the food assistance program. So for context, Medicaid in Kansas is a vital part of our health insurance program. Even though we have not expanded Medicaid, it is still an incredibly vital part of our health insurance system. It pays for about 30% of all prenatal care and births in Kansas. It insures about 30% of all children in Kansas and pays for about 65% of all nursing home care in Kansas. It is a very, very important part of our healthcare system. On the table in Congress is cuts in the magnitude of $880 billion. That equates to about 11% of total federal funding for Medicaid over the next decade. In Kansas, we receive about $3 billion a year for Medicaid funding. So if we're looking at 11% cut, rough math, right? We're looking at a little over $300 million a year, fewer federal dollars. It will simply be impossible without major revenue changes in the state to backfill that money. Like it just, we don't have $300 million sitting around every year to backfill Medicaid dollars. States will be left with terrible choices around cutting eligibility, cutting provider rates, what that could do to hospitals. Kansas has the greatest number of rural hospitals that are in danger of closing, and cuts to Medicaid is only going to make that worse and likely make many of them close. And so I say this because I think this is really important. This is not a done deal. There is still opportunity to reach out to our delegation from Kansas to advocate about the importance of Medicaid and to really urge that it's just taken off the table. We cannot afford these types of cuts and sustain any level of care near what we provide today. Okay, I'm going to say one more thing on Medicaid. And then I think the other thing we have to think about is Medicaid is the largest source of federal dollars into our state budget. So when we talk about those types of cuts, even if we're talking about backfilling a portion of that loss, that is going to come at the expense of something else in the budget. The next biggest thing in the budget is K-12 education, right? Like these conversations are all entwined, and major cuts to one program are not going to leave other programs untouched. And so I just think it's important to recognize that these are all intertwined, and that, it's kind of a balancing game of how we do this in the state budget. And then I'll mention the other really big cut in Congress. Well, there's a few, but the other one I'm going to mention is to the SNAP program, which is the food assistance program. We're looking at $230 billion potentially that Congress is talking about cutting out of that program. For context, all food assistance dollars that a person or a family receives, those are all federal dollars. The states do not contribute to those dollars. And so I think the estimate for Kansas, based on some of the proposals in Congress in terms of increasing or making states start to contribute to some of those dollars, kind of changing that funding formula a little bit, would potentially mean around $40 million a year that Kansas would have to come up with in state funds just to maintain the program we have now. And let me be very clear, we run a very lean food assistance program in this state. We have very strict eligibility criteria, much stricter than the vast majority of other states. And we expect need to go up. When we talk about job loss, when we talk about a downturn in the economy, we expect more people to be needing this assistance. And so when I say $40 million of state funds, that's just to maintain what we provide today and doesn't take into account the increased need that we expect coming. And again, if the legislature were to do that, that $40 million is coming out of somewhere else. And there's just not a lot of other places to take it from without causing a lot of harm. I think I'm gonna pause there and maybe circle back at the end if I have some additional thoughts after everyone else goes, but I'm also happy to answer questions now or wait, or whatever the moderator's preference is.
Yeah, I think we'll wait for questions till the end, but yeah, thank you so much. I'm taking notes, right? Lots of things we're already getting. So thank you so much, Suzanne. And yeah, I've already got people posting stuff in the Q&A, so we'll get to that after we get through everybody. Okay, so next up is Brooklyn Mosley from Kansas House District 46. So Brooklyn, what can you share with us?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Brooklyn Mosley. I am a Kansan impacted by this current administration. I am also a daughter of a mom who uses Medicare and Social Security as a big part of her income. I'm a sister of a federal worker. I use the VA as my primary care along with my private insurance. So I choose to use the VA, and I just use my private insurance because I don't want to explain to doctors why my arm does weird things. I also have a 401k, and the list goes on. I am impacted impacted. My family is impacted. My friends are impacted. Representative Wikle did a really great job of really explaining what is at stake and what is on the table with what's going on in the current moment. I'm going to talk a little bit about how cuts to health cuts to Social Security or potentially missed Social Security payments are going to impact our seniors in our communities. So right now, the fastest growing demographic in the country for unhoused people are above the age of 50 years old. And so if that group is already struggling and you start to like see cuts, or you start to see people not getting their money, or Social Security not growing with inflation, we're going to start seeing much older people fall into that gap. We have like I remember knocking doors this past summer in North Lawrence. I represent the northeast part of Lawrence, Kansas. So I represent basically the best part, the part that has downtown, the campus, but but I also represent North Lawrence and the Pinckney neighborhoods, which are some of our neighborhoods that has the most need in our community. I remember knocking doors in Pinckney, and I talked to a woman who was in her 70s who was working at least 30 hours a week, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. So any cuts or missed payments to Social Security is really going to start to impact some of our seniors in our community. We also are looking at the fact that we also have, Representative Wikle mentioned how much federal aid or federal money flows into Kansas. So right now, the University of Kansas, just their NIH, they have an NIH grant that's $160 million. Like that's $160 million that's not just going into like research, but it's hiring people, it's hiring Kansas. It's actually bringing some of the best talent into Kansas. We are very lucky that this is a destination for a lot of people around the world that is at risk. When you start to look at the food insecurity issue that we are dealing with in our communities, Representative Wikle really touched on what SNAP benefits and like cuts to that is how that's going to impact families. That is if you have children in school, if you have grandkids, that is their friends, that are the people those are the children down the block not getting their needs being met. When you start seeing cuts to things like childcare, the things that Kansas need the most are childcare, healthcare, food security, and housing, and all those things are on the chopping block. And so when we start to look at what's going on in the federal government, I look at it like this is very concerning for me, not only as a just a human, but also as someone who cares deeply for the people in my community. Like deeply for the people who care deeply in my community. I also have you're looking at how just the uncertainty. We have a lot. There's, with us not expanded Medicaid, which means people are not getting their mental health needs being met. And then you add on to the stress of people literally being nervous every single day. I had to talk my sister off of the ledge about taking the buyout from the federal government because she was so stressed out getting the constant emails, the psychological warfare. These are public servants who honestly they're not getting rich off of any of these salaries. They are doing a public good, and now they are having to have the stress of not worrying about, am I going to have a job tomorrow? Is some 21-year-old going to walk into my office with no life experience and tell someone who's a PhD what they need to be doing or what they need not to be doing? And so we are in a very precarious time. The way that I look at this time, this is the time that we really should be leaning into community. So I know people are like, what can I do right now? One of the easiest things that you can do right now is, if you don't know your neighbors, introduce yourself to your neighbors. If you don't know, if there is a senior citizen that lives in your community that lives alone, you should just check in on them. Let them know that you are someone that they can reach out to. Like the one thing that I've really been doing in this moment, as someone who is just a human that lives in Kansas, who happens to be a legislator, is before I got elected into the state house, I knew my neighbors. I could tell you which neighbor works where. I could tell you which neighbor is living off Social Security. I could tell you the fact that I have a neighbor who was paying $300 for their property tax at some point, and now their property tax is $2,400 a year. and they are a senior citizen who has been retired for the last 20 years, and they are at least are actually 30 years because she's 84. And she can't afford to have any piece of her income to be taken away. So, much like Suzanne, I am going to allow myself to have answer to questions at the end. I know there's a lot of great panelists who have input and they have great things to say. So I do not want to steal thunder on food, education, and all the great people who are going to speak ahead of me. So, or after me. So thank you very much, Women for Kansas, for hosting this. And then also thank you for the now 176 people who chose to be here on a Monday evening with us.
Yeah, thank you, Brooklyn. Thank you so much. All right, Marci Francisco, can you share with us some of the impacts of federal policy on Kansans as well?
Certainly, and my thanks go out to two great legislators I get to work with at the Capitol. Representative Wikle and Representative Mosley really did share what this affects is going to have on our community. So I am honored to serve on the Senate Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. So we haven't talked too much about the impact of tariffs yet, but it's our American family farmers and our Kansas family farmers and ranchers who are going to bear the brunt of this global trade war. When those tariffs are imposed, agriculture products are almost among the first targets for retaliation, leaving farmers with few options to recover lost markets and revenue. Over 20% of ag production in the United States is exported. They operate on tight margins and long production cycles. They can't simply pivot their business models. And trade actions should be paired with real tangible protections for the farmers who are directly impacted. But that is not what's happening. So our farmers in Kansas are going to be planting, if they haven't ever started, in the next few weeks. But that means they have to have already purchased their seeds. And they had to decide sometime back what they were going to plant. So right now, if you decided you were going to plant grain sorghum, you might not have the market for it because USAID is not purchasing that sorghum to send overseas. The market for soybeans is much lower than it has been. And probably those sales to China for soybeans will be replaced by sales from Brazil and Argentina. And so one concern that I have is that that means, not only have we lost those sales, there's going to be more clearing of Amazon forests, and we will never get those back. So the whole intent of what we had been doing in this country was to help make less of an impact on our climate, and we may simply turn that around. So I was able to speak earlier today with Nick Lewandowski of the Kansas Farmers Union. He knew of a farmer who had made a plan to purchase an air seeder. This is a huge investment. It's $900,000. When he got to the place to make that purchase, he found out that 25% tariff meant another $225,000 that he had to come up with. So pair that with the lower prices for grain sorghum and soybeans and wheat, how are our farmers going to be able to recover from that? And so it's also that steel and aluminum are imports that we need to build farm machinery if we want to do that in this state. So closer to home, the Z&M Twisted Vines Winery had gotten a $55,000 REAP grant, Rural Energy for America project. And so they went to the bank with their USDA grant and got a loan to proceed to put solar panels on the farm, to put in an EV charger. And then they have learned that that grant was canceled. So that's just one story that is being repeated across this state. And, we prided ourselves of being the breadbasket of the world. And now we're saying we're not going to support those families and farmers and ranchers who have made that possible. So I too will be here to answer questions or commiserate. I do think we want to hear these stories so that we can share them. And I'm hoping that if our congressional delegation didn't have the opportunity to join in, they will have the opportunity to have a staff member listen to what others have heard.
Thank you so much, Marci. I'm probably like many of you, I'm feverishly taking notes as we go through this. So thank you for these personal stories. I think that are exactly what many of us are looking for. Okay, so next we're going to have Angie Powers from KNEA, the Kansas National Education Association, and Angie's colleague Brian Skinner is with us too. So Angie, are you going to go first, or Brian? Which is the one?
And Brian and I are pretty used to being able to tag team these things. So my name's Angie Powers. My pronouns are she, her, and I have been an educator in Kansas for 25 years. I'm also a proud mom of a non-binary human, and I have the opportunity to serve on the KNEA and National Education Association board. So I'm so pleased to be here as somebody who's been in our Kansas schools. The impact of what is happening at the federal level. We are seeing the impact already, and we're on the leading edge of more impacts, I'm afraid. So I'll speak a little bit to some of the impacts I wanted to highlight, and then Brian's a special education teacher, so he may have a little more insight into that. I'm in the Kansas City area. I'm in Olathe, and he's in Newton, so we'll kind of speak a little bit to our areas. I think as we look at what's happening at the federal level in terms of education, I think, to put it simply, I think we're going to see larger class sizes, and we're going to see less support for students and educators. And I think we're going to see less support, particularly for our students who are most at risk, lower income students in rural areas. Of course, we have lower income students in suburban areas and urban areas as well. And then we know we have a lot of students who are under-resourced, maybe because of their identity. And we're already seeing a lot of chilling effect on diversity programs. Whether or not what's happening at the federal level is determined to be legal, we know that when people are scared to do the right thing to support our students, it happens less. And so we're already seeing those impacts in our schools. To bring it a little bit closer to home, and I'll speak to Title I funding, and Brian might be able to speak a little bit more to special education. But let's say the Department of Education, the dismantling of the Department of Education leads to cutting Title I funding altogether, which we don't know what it's going to mean exactly with funding. But it's unlikely that funding is going to remain the same or be increased. But let's say that that funding was completely cut off. That is $138,900,000 of federal revenue just for Kansas gone. If we were to turn that into a number that could be the equivalent of entry-level teacher positions, that is the loss of over 3,000 teachers statewide. And that is not all of the Department of Education funding that comes to Kansas. That is just the Title I. As I kind of draw the attention to special education funding, we know that's been a hot topic in our Kansas legislature. And I want to say that I know there are people on this call, legislators, who have been fighting to fully fund SPED for the excess cost of SPED at the state level. And I want to thank you for that. The increases that we received last year for this year, and we've got a little bump planned for next year, have made a considerable difference, but we have a lot of ways to go. Like I said, I'm in Olathe, and Olathe's SPED population of students is actually about the same as the entire school district of Dodge City. And Dodge City is the 16th or 18th biggest district in the state. So to say that our SPED population in Olathe is huge is not an understatement. In our 24-25 budget, we have over $91 million allocated to SPED. Of that, the federal SPED funding for Olathe is just over $8 million. So when we're talking about a $91 million budget, $8 million is not a small amount, but $8 million is a smaller amount as compared to some other sources. However, we know that we don't even get enough SPED funding to cover the actual costs. In Olathe the last few years, we have had to transfer about $40 million out of our general budget into our SPED budget because, as you all know, special education requires that all of our students' needs are met, regardless of whether or not they're funded. And so what that does is that impacts all students. That impacts the amount of money available to pay our paras, our custodians, our counselors, our administrators, more, all of them, because we are allocating, we're having to use money of the general fund in order to meet those students' needs. Another thing I wanted to highlight would be vouchers. We did see some lack of progress in vouchers in Kansas, and that was good. But we see a big focus on vouchers nationally. And I mean, we look at voucher programs in other states. Arizona is a great example. And, you know, over 80% of the students and families that receive vouchers, taking money that would have gone to public schools and diverting them to schools that have very little accountability measures. 80% of the families in Arizona that receive those vouchers were already going to a private school or homeschool. So we know that the real school choice when it comes to vouchers is it's about the schools having a choice about who they're going to take, not about families having choices. So we're really nervous about the impact that federal legislation on vouchers could have here in Kansas, even though Kansans have spoken loudly that we do not want to expand voucher-like programs like scholarship tax credits here in Kansas. Another thing I wanted to mention, some of you may have heard about a series of letters. There was a letter sent out last week from the Trump administration to state level Department of Education. It was a certification basically saying that we're not going to, we're not going to have any DEI in our schools. And there's a lot of conversation about how legal this is, and a lot of the executive orders and actions are going to be litigated. But what I want you all to know is that none of this has to be legal in order to impact the services our students receive. They just have to scare school districts and individual educators into feeling like, oh, well, maybe I won't do that lesson because I'm afraid somebody's going to report me to the DEI hotline, right? The level of legality is irrelevant if that chilling effect continues. So I'm very nervous to see how this is impacting not only policies of districts, but just the individual decision-making of educators who know that we're here to meet every student's need every day, but we're scared. I've heard from several educators that want to do the right thing, but they don't want to be targeted online. They don't want to lose their job. So we're very nervous about that. I had a great opportunity to have some conversation with Johnson County Mental Health because we've done a lot of work in the Olathe School District in conjunction with Johnson County Mental Health, so trying to support our students' mental health and increasingly our educators' mental health, because a dysregulated adult is not going to be able to calm a dysregulated child. And I was talking a little bit about Johnson County Mental Health got a really great adolescent mental health grant from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And we're working on using this grant to not only provide educators supports on how to do some mental health first aid with their students, but also with each other, because we have to take care of each other in order to take care of our students. And they were just notified that grant, the remaining monies for that grant is not going to be given to them. And what that means is it's up to the county level mental health to figure out how to fill that gap, because they're going to still provide services. We're still going to do this work. But now we have to figure out, okay, where's another pot of money we can take that from? We're putting a strain on all of the systems of care that we have across our nation here in Kansas, and even in our local, our county mental health, even though it's a county run mental health, having these grant monies pulled impacts them greatly. In talking with the Johnson County Mental Health Department, they also mentioned the DEI hotline. One of the pieces in the teen mental health first aid training that our educators can receive to be able to support our students has a video of a trans student speaking to the mental health challenges they've experienced because of the way they've been treated. Being able to connect people with Trevor Project, those are things that need to be done. But now, are we going to get calls to the DEI hotline because we have a trans student speaking about their lived experience? I think another panelist already mentioned the Department of Children and Family Services got notification that their commodity budget was cut in half. When our children don't have food, they are not learning. And these federal cuts have implications that we're starting to see, but we're not seeing all of it yet. And so we're very nervous about how this is going to build. Last kind of thing I wanted to mention is that reaching out to your federal legislators, super important. I have to say, Brian and I get an opportunity to go to DC 3 times a year and visit with our federal legislators. Representative Sharice Davids meets with us in person along with her staff almost every single time. And then we have other offices that sometimes won't even meet with us. Senator Roger Mosler's office sometimes will meet with us and sometimes won't. So really encourage you all to let your voices be heard in communicating with them. But remember, the staff for those offices, the ones picking up the phone, they're not the ones making the decisions. So a little bit of calmness in communicating with them is always helpful. The other thing I wanted to mention is as we face these federal cuts, what happens at the local level is going to become increasingly important. So those school board races, in Olathe, we have three school board positions up. It's going to be our local institutions, our local agencies, and our local boards that are going to have an increasingly huge impact on the quality of services that we receive in our communities. So tuning into those local school board races, I cannot emphasize how important that is. There's an organization called Heal Together that has a campaign called Public School Strong. So if you were to Google Heal Together Public School Strong, you would absolutely find it. It'd be one of the top Google results. They have fantastic online trainings for community members that will kind of teach you some of these advocacy skills, like Why go to a school board meeting? What do you look for in a school board meeting? How do you get a local team together to go to school board meetings and share information? How do you put together a petition about a specific issue that you see in your community? But Heal Together Public School Strong is a great resource. They have so many great trainings, some live, some self-paced. And then lastly, I was going to mention that if you'd like more information about what the dismantling of the Department of Education means, NEA.org/protect. So NEA as in National Education Association, NEA.org/protect is kind of our landing page for all things protect public education. And it is constantly being updated with information and action alerts. So I would really encourage you to check that out. And with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Brian Skinner.
All right, thank you, Angie. Yeah, so as was mentioned earlier, so I'm Brian Skinner. I am a high school special education teacher in Newton, Kansas, and along with Angie, I am the other Kansan that represents Kansas educators on the National Board of Directors as well as then the State Board of Directors, and I'm also then the 2023 Kansas Teacher of the Year. So I've had a lot of opportunities to be able to speak with representatives, as well as to talk with educators from across the entire state of what this impact would really be for educators, and if we were to dismantle the Department of Education. So when you look at the biggest programs that are impacted, they're going to be, as Angie mentioned, your Title I funding, your special education funding with IDEA, your student loan forgiveness programs, and then your free and reduced lunch programs, similar to SNAP, which Suzanne had mentioned earlier. Angie had talked a little bit about Title I funds and had given the statewide number. If you break that down to individual districts, so there are 287 districts in the state of Kansas right now. If you look at just Newton, Newton relies on $607,000 roughly that comes from the federal government for Title I funding. That's a significant portion of our budget. And people don't always understand what these funds are intended to do. Title I funds are funds that are put in place that provide resources to districts that can help students before they fall behind, which is really significant. Without these funds, instead of being proactive with a student's education, a district may be forced to be reactive, which hurts our education system and strains our education system as a whole. When I look at special education funds, so state law requires that special education is funded for the district at 92%. That's been a law that's been standing for decades in accordance with IDEA law. We are already not meeting that parameter. Right now, we're funding for the districts at roughly 72%. And the federal government is supposed to pick up 10 to 15% of those dollars with that. And I will echo, as Angie did, we have some representatives on this call tonight that I know have been doing really good work to try and advocate for that special education funding for Kansans. So I can't overstate enough how much I appreciate that and appreciate the impact that can have. So if that money is not coming from the federal government that they're providing, it just puts that much higher of a burden on our state government to have to provide even more money than the money that is not already going to districts that need it. And people will say, well, it just funnels it. The state can now determine what they do with that money. You're right, they can. And what some states have done, what some states have tried to do, as a number of congressional members in Kansas have tried to do, is push those money towards vouchers, not towards public schools. That's not what they are intended to do. That's not in alignment with IDEA, which is the Individuals of Disability Education Act, something that I know that our secretary, our cabinet, Department of Ed member does not at the national level. And when you take those monies away from your public schools towards private schools, and I'm not trying to say anything negative towards private schools, but I am trying to say that our public schools service 90% of all of our kids. We have 500,000 students in Kansas that attend public schools. We have 40,000 educators that teach in public schools and tens of thousands more that are education support professionals that work in our public school systems. 90% and 95% of those students that have exceptionalities, that have disabilities, they are in our public school systems. Pulling money away from that disproportionately hurts those that are at risk, those that are in rural communities and may not have access to private schools, or those who live in areas that choose not to go to public schools or private schools, or those that are not chosen by private schools. Public schools are for all students, and the federal dollars that come across ensure that those monies are there. When I think about the impact that is had just across the board, obviously the actual cuts to those programs would be massive. And they would have human impacts that impact the livelihood of people's professions and impact the ability for individuals to achieve their best success through their education. But what I see as a much bigger concern and a much bigger impact, as Angie had sort of alluded to, is the fear that comes with it. I almost daily get texts from educators that I know from across the state, or I have people within my own district come up to me and say, am I going to lose my job? Is the funding that I rely on still going to be there? Should I consider going to a different profession since these jobs won't be there? And I see that as heartbreaking for a number of reasons. A, it's heartbreaking because you've got individuals that are worried if the way that they provide for their families is still going to be there. But then you look at the other side of the coin and you look at the long-term health of this profession, and how can you advocate that the best and the brightest go into the public education profession if you've got so much rhetoric that is coming down that is saying you may not actually be able to have a job because there may not be funding there? It hurts an already strapped system by putting fear into the spaces. And so that hurts my heart a lot, knowing that that rhetoric is there. As Angie said, wait to see whether or not some of these cuts that are attempted to be made by the administration hold up in courts and whether they're legal. But even if they are determined by the courts to be illegal and reversed, the impact of the fear and the impact of the potential deterrence from the profession are real, and they're happening now. The ways that you can help most is by reaching out to your representatives, reaching out to your senators. And when you do so, tell the stories of that impact. I have found when I'm lobbying and advocating with Angie in DC that the most impact that I have is finding a way to connect with an individual first, and then from there, talk about the story of impact. Numbers are great, but numbers can turn a lot of different ways. What is much harder for someone to turn away from is hearing your personal story, hearing the story of your colleague down the hall from you, hearing the story of the kids that are having impact. So the more that we can reach out with those stories, that's what I would encourage everyone to do. It does have an impact. I've seen with advocating and lobbying with Senator Marshall that there have been times where he has changed his position. Not nearly as many times as I would like him to, but I've seen him move the needle, especially when you're looking at special education issues and some of those aspects. So it's not a lost cause, even if you look at someone's voting record. And the more people that reach out, the better chance that we have of having an impact of switching those votes and switching them enough to have the positive impact. So those are the pieces that I really wanted to touch on, and I would welcome any education questions that are coming as other people have the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian and Angie. Thank you so much. Lots of good stuff. I was feverishly taking my notes there. All right. And we have a teacher of the year with us. I feel like we buried the lead on that one. So thank you, Brian, for saying that. Yes, I love knowing that. I love reading those articles. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm from Hutchinson, so those Newton Railroaders, you always got to watch out for them. They're always high achievers. Yes. Okay, so Dena Sattler is next. So Dena, can you share a little bit with us about veterans and the services veterans receive from the federal government and how that's being impacted?
Yeah, sure can. Hey, thanks everybody for being on the call. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much to the wonderful speakers we've already had. I just want to follow up on a little something that Brian said. He could not be more right about the need to put a face on these issues. That is the most impactful thing we can all do, whether it's sharing in social media, talking to the traditional media. I'm an old journalist, so I can tell you that that is the kind of thing that will move the needle. I've always been disappointed that we haven't done a better job of that. There could be no better time to do it than now. So keep that in mind. You all know people. We are all affected in some way, and we have friends and family who are affected. So thank you for what you do. A lot of people always ask, what can I do? That's one thing. We need to share these stories. We talk a lot about data and things like that. And unfortunately, that's probably what I'm going to talk about, but we need to literally tell people's stories. So thanks, Brian, for pointing that out. Like I said, I was a longtime newspaper publisher here in Kansas. I also worked for Governor Kelly and Lieutenant Governor Tolan. So I've worked on both sides of the coin. I've been in the private sector and I've worked for government as well. And what's happening to government workers is beyond disgraceful. I also served 8 years in the Army, and of course I have a lot of friends who served, and I'm seeing firsthand the effects of this reckless cutting. So I'm heartbroken and disgusted by what's happening to veterans and senior citizens in Kansas and beyond in our country. I will talk a little bit about senior citizens as well. I know it's not on the screen, but my mother lived with me for several years, and she's transitioning to assisted living. So I'm seeing firsthand how she could and will be affected. Anyway, I think my point here is instead of recklessly cutting in a thoughtless manner, we should be doing more to support our veterans and our seniors, not less. I think that's lost on people, obviously, at the federal level right now. As for veterans, I think we all know many federal workers being terminated across the board for no good reason are veterans. Veterans make up about 30% of the federal workforce, bringing extraordinary life and professional experience to their jobs. Yet they've been fired, called back, pressured to quit. Somebody mentioned fear and uncertainty, and I think that accurately describes the world that veterans and many others are living in right now. It's completely unfair. We know the Veterans Administration has been understaffed for years. Many veterans already are waiting too long for care. Many travel long distances for care, especially in rural America, and we know that firsthand here in Kansas. I think we have 3 veterans medical facilities in Wichita, Topeka, and Leavenworth. Of course, that completely leaves out the western half of the state. And this situation's on track to only get worse. An internal memo calls for cutting more than 80,000 VA employees, which is deliberately crippling an already stressed system. We need to support our veterans. They already face long wait times, staff burnout, and now it's just going to be amplified, which will only lead to less effective care. Completely unfair. And perhaps most disgusting and tragic, the cost-cutting plan includes de-staffing suicide hotlines. Our veterans of all ages suffer from PTSD, depression, other mental health issues. You know, they have financial troubles, challenges accessing benefits. Many are homeless. Veterans are at a much higher risk of suicide than the general population. Current estimates right now have more than 17 veterans a day committing suicide in our nation. That's a problem affecting Kansas as well. The rate of suicide by young veterans aged 18 to 34 is actually on the rise in Kansas. We have 200,000 veterans here in Kansas, dismantling their support programs and terminating their employment for no good reason simply has no upside. These men and women served our nation with courage and dedication. They deserve much better. Just transition a little bit to a little something on seniors. Like I said, my mother recently transitioned to an assisted living facility. I think you know many seniors in nursing homes need Medicaid when their savings are exhausted. In Kansas, 4 of 7 nursing home residents, that's more than half of 19,000 that are in nursing homes, rely on Medicaid for services Medicare won't cover. So now they're being scared. Nursing home residents are being threatened by deep cuts to Medicaid. And of course, they aren't alone. Other older adults, people with disabilities, and low income families also will be badly hurt by Medicaid cuts that we've all heard about. As it stands right now, more than 30 million Americans will lose Medicaid healthcare coverage, and that's just to benefit billionaires at the expense of a safety net that keeps millions of Americans alive. Also hurting seniors that we're hearing about is the closure of Social Security offices. Even though Social Security has long been understaffed, consider that just 10 years ago, Social Security had 7,000 more workers serving 7 million fewer beneficiaries than we have today. That's hardly a situation of waste right now. It's actually a situation where there are great efficiencies. That said, there's always room for improved efficiencies, but the process for streamlining needs to be thoughtful and ensure the quality of services all Kansans, all Americans want and need. Honestly, this administration wants to wreck and then privatize government services to create profit-seeking ventures that put profits ahead of people. The bottom line in Kansas is we will lose hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funds and thousands of jobs across all government programs. And bottom line there is this will dramatically hurt families and communities in Kansas. So as a journalist, I have a direct question for our representatives in Congress here. At a time when we need more resources to help veterans and our seniors in Kansas, you are standing by and allowing them to be hurt by these reckless, irresponsible cuts. You should be pushing for policies that make healthcare more affordable for seniors. You should be fighting for policies that give veterans the support they need. What are you doing to defend and improve conditions for our seniors and our veterans? Inaction suggests you agree with the overarching goal of privatizing these services for veterans and seniors without regard for harm along the way. Please explain why you support this privatization and how it will benefit Kansans and other Americans in need of these critical services. At the least, you have an obligation to your constituents to explain your reasoning behind each vote you make in favor of these cuts. If you decline to meet personally with the people you serve in a public town hall setting, then you need to release public statements explaining your votes on these very critical issues. Please stop avoiding the people you were elected to serve. So anyway, thanks everybody. Again, thank you for having me here, and I'm really looking forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Dena. Yes, that's a lot of important information. Again, still taking my notes real quick here. All right, well, next, Jay Moyer. Jay is here to talk to us about LGBTQ plus activism and how federal policy changes are affecting members of that community. So Jay, take it away.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Jay Moyer. My pronouns are they and them. And I currently, well, first of all, everything I do is volunteer. And I want to make that clear because a lot of that work right now, especially in places like Kansas, is volunteer. A lot of the people that you are probably seeing on this panel either are not paid or do a lot of work to advocate for what they do, like being paid for their job, like without being paid for that work. So, and I think that's important to bring up because that's going to feed into kind of what I have to talk about as it pertains to kind of how a lot of the things that are happening, not just at the federal, but also at the state and local level, are affecting LGBTQ people. So basically what I do is I work within the Democratic Party to try and help get candidates elected. And by the way, everything I say tonight, I'm speaking in my personal capacity, not in any official role. But I sit on the board of Kansas Young Democrats, and a young Democrat is defined as anyone who's under the age of 35 and involved in the Democratic Party. And then I also am the vice chair of the LGBTQ caucus for the Kansas Democratic Party. And I do a lot of my policy-facing work as one of the inaugural members of the Johnson County Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coalition set up by the county government. Yes, we still exist. Yes, we are still moving forward. So really quickly, when I was trying to figure out how to talk about what's going on at the federal level, I did a very quick Google search about a lot of the stuff that the Trump administration has done since he was inaugurated on January 20th. And it's been less than 2 months, and in regards to health and healthcare alone, Trump has already passed 10 executive orders specifically targeting the LGBTQ community. These look like things such as rolling back executive orders the Biden administration put in place to protect LGBTQ folks. Some of them are executive orders that I think are just meant to set a narrative about our community. For example, they talk about the need to defend women from extreme gender ideology. They talk about ending radical DEI programs. And the only reason I can wrap my head around that they would add that rhetoric and add that language is because it becomes clearer and clearer every single day, not just with this administration, but also with some of the things that the Kansas state legislature has been passing. You know, they have a Republican supermajority there. I think it's become clearer that our community is the scapegoat for American conservatives today. They want to use members of my community to advance their agenda, to win their elections. And I think Dena said it really well too. Profits over people. A lot of the things that'll happen as they target our community with policy is that they intend to privatize the government so that they can make sure that people don't feel empowered to have places in government. They want to make sure that we are so exhausted that we don't even try to write the rules, right? That we don't feel that, and in cases of our community, that we don't even feel safe and welcome in our communities, in our homes, and that way they can take that power and use it to gain for themselves, whether that be an elected position or an attempt to make more money for them or their business. Talking about specific state legislation, because I've been doing some advocacy work in the Kansas State Capitol since I got involved in the first Trump administration in 2018. It was when I kind of first broke out into what I do in Kansas, and I've seen the same types of bills. Republicans in Kansas, for example, have tried to ban access to gender affirming care for trans youth for the past 3 years. And the only reason that they weren't able to do it, and thank you to the people who are on this call, is because of state legislators, advocates who showed up tirelessly time and time again in our state legislature to be a buffer to that. But I have to tell you all, I have been blatantly exhausted since Trump took office, since the election. I have been tired. I have had to conserve my energy and focus my efforts because I'm on the front lines here. I go day in and day out and I watch these live streams from the legislature. I watch C-SPAN more religiously than some other people in my generation watch TikTok. And it's really, really tiring. And the thing that wears me out about it, like I said, is the rhetoric. The way that some of these lawmakers talk about members of my community. We're not a political talking point. We are people. And I think that when I think about the impact that a lot of these federal policies are having on my community, we can point to policy. We can point to kind of the ways that they are dismantling the rights for my community. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's been so tiring. I don't even know how to put it into words. And I know that that's a messy answer. It's not a clean answer, but that's the impact, is while they go and talk about my identity or other members of my community as radical or harmful, or there's even an executive order that calls advancing rights for LGBTQ people wasteful, which I don't see how saying, hey, don't discriminate against a trans person is wasteful in the federal government. It bears down on us. And I just think, we talked earlier about putting a face on it. I think about all of the people in our country that are so scared they can't even come out and be themselves. They can't even talk about what it means to be trans or what it means to even be lesbian and gay. We're worried right now about the Supreme Court taking action to dismantle marriage equality. there could be marriages across this country in Kansas that become nullified because the Supreme Court of the United States decides to hear a case dismantling the right for LGBTQ people to get married. And it's horrifying. And I don't know if I have an answer. I think something Brian said that kind of gave me a little bit of hope. Man, it is a feat if you go talk to Roger Marshall and get him to change his mind on anything. Bravo to you, sir, because I have not had that luck. He will not speak with a single member of our community. I've not had luck. Anytime I try to reach out to him or hear back from his office, it's thank you for contacting us. This is how the Trump administration feels. And it's very cookie cutter, very, very like drafted, if that makes sense. I know the word I'm trying to think of, but I can't think of it. So I want to reiterate, I think it's all by design. I really think they are doing this. And I know this gets brought up a ton. I would argue that a lot of the things we're seeing with the Trump administration and his Republican political party right now are I feel as though a lot of their actions mirror a lot of what we were seeing in the lead up to World War II in Germany. I just can't help but to think that we've seen this tired old playbook before. Going after Greenland, going after Canada, putting tariffs on islands that are uninhabited. It's this, and then putting members of your own community down and fear-mongering over a community that they know that there's just no education over in our country. That comes straight out of a certain playbook that I'd rather not go back to. But I guess the one thing I will say is do keep getting involved. I do know that the more you call, the more you email, especially on the local level, your state representatives will listen to you, especially if you're a constituent in their district. And even then, go even deeper. Run for city council. Make changes at the local level. Contact your city councilors. Contact your school board members. A lot of those people, even though it may not seem like it right now because of all these scary executive orders coming down from the Trump administration, those people are the ones who know your community. They can listen to you. And a lot of the times they can also advocate for you at a higher level that you may not be able to if your lawmakers won't reach out to you. So I guess if I were to summarize in some bullet points, a lot of bad stuff is happening. We are exhausted. And we need everyone to step up, to speak out against the injustice that's happening in our government. And we need your help in making sure that this doesn't get worse. This all leads up to elections, folks. And if we can take our electoral power back, that will be a pretty good buffer to a lot of the things that this Trump regime is trying to do in our country. I know it might not have been exactly 10 minutes, but those were the thoughts that I had prepared.
Thank you so much, Jay. And thank you for your personal honesty about the toll this is taking, which also makes me really grateful that you spent time with us, because I know this is, one more thing that you have to do on top of all of your work. So we are so grateful that you were sharing your story with us in that way, especially because, as we've learned tonight, stories are so important, and we really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right. Next we have Jessica Cooney with Just Food, a food pantry in Douglas County. So Jessica, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Jessica Cooney. I'm the Impact Director at Just Food of Douglas County. I'm here tonight to speak on how 2 federal funding changes have already begun to affect Kansans and our food system. To give a little background on my organization, we are fairly unique in that we operate as both a food bank and a food pantry. A quick distinction is that food banks kind of bank food to distribute to other organizations, and then pantries distribute directly to people. We are doing both. We partner very closely with Harvesters, who is our regional food bank. We are known as a redistribution organization within the Harvesters Network, which is then part of the Feeding America Network. Our food pantry specifically serves upwards of about 1,500 families a week through various programs. And while my organization directly is not funded by the USDA, we are facing like the downstream impacts that our partners and our farmers are already beginning to face. So the first program that I wanted to talk about was LFPA, which was the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program. I went straight to the USDA website and pulled a quote. It was conceived in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The LFPA programs have invested over $1 billion into local food purchases to date. Through these programs, USDA has provided $900 million in funding to all 50 states, District of Columbia, 4 territories, 84 tribal governments, and sourcing food from over 8,000 local producers, with more than 5,000 identified as underserved. This wholesome food has gone to 7,900 food banks, food pantries, and communities across America. The administration has now canceled the next $1 billion of allocated funds towards that program. What is, in my opinion, especially awful is that these are reimbursement programs, which means that our farmers front the money. Similar to what Marci spoke on, they had already planned for these funds, and there's still no answer to the future of these programs. I distinctly remember having a conversation in 2020 with a local farmer that my organization works with, and he expressed concerns that the government was creating a false market that would someday be stripped away. And here we are today, and I hate to say it, but I am truly unsure if local food will survive this administration. Notably, commodity farmers that are facing, the onset of tariff issues, the ones that produce corn, soybeans, oil seeds, other row crops, the majority of those don't go to feeding people. And while tariffs are going to impact farmers across the nation, these programs specifically are going after small local producers, which I think is even more problematic. The second program that I would like to speak to is in our world known as TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program. The Emergency Food Assistance Program was established in 1983. It is a federal food distribution program that supports food banks and other emergency feeding organizations serving low-income Americans. Federal assistance takes the form of federally purchased commodities, including fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, grains, dairy, not just what you think of as canned goods. Again, I pulled another quote from the USDA website. It was, "This memorandum provides information about approximately $500 million in additional support to emergency food programs that the USDA is providing in fiscal year 2025. The Commodity Credit Corporation funding will help emergency food organizations as they continue to deal with supply chain challenges and elevated food costs by supporting purchases." A little over a week ago, our partners at Harvesters were informed that all of that funding had been paused and that shipments slated for April through August of this year had been seemingly canceled with no answer as to why or what would happen to that food. So besides our donations that my organization receives from the general public, these programs are some of the only food that my organization receives at no cost. I think what is a common misconception is that organizations directly feeding people are not getting all of the food for free. We spend $40,000 a month in food currently and are already unable to bridge that gap and meet the need. And as an organization, we are continuing to brace for what's to come and prepared to do what we need to do to ensure the shoppers that come see us every week still leave with food in hand. At this moment, it is hard to be optimistic about a future. We're still waiting for an updated farm bill at the federal level. The farm bill is a piece of legislation that is supposed to be passed every 5 years. It houses SNAP and other federal nutrition programs. It's been up for reauthorization since September of 2023. and Congress has yet to agree on an updated bill. People in my world, food and farm advocates across the country, have been advocating for positive change in the Farm Bill for years that are yet to make it into any sort of draft, and we are preparing to battle for even more devastating cuts in the near future. So all in all, these programs are not wasteful. They're supporting small businesses, rural America, children, seniors, and our country's most vulnerable. And we are only beginning to see how catastrophic these cuts are going to be for food systems, but especially our local food systems that deserve to be supported. I go back to that conversation that I had with one of our farmers in 2020, that like their nightmare of creating false markets that they're not going to be able to be reimbursed for is happening. And we are on the precipice of losing really good quality food going to, like I said, our most vulnerable populations. Similar to, you know, what Jay said, I am on the front line in the food pantry every day. And there are tonal shifts that are able to be felt. I have broken up more fights in the last 2 or 3 months than I have in my probably, you know, not in total, but more this year than any other year I've had so far. And we're bracing for more exhaustion and for more cuts, and we are hopeful for a future where, you know, we know that there's enough food out there. The amount of food is not the problem. It is how it is distributed. It is how it ends up in people's hands. And as an organization, you know, our organization is called Just Food. It is not because we just do food, which I think is a common, you know, funny. It's because we believe that it is just that people have food. We believe that food is a human right, people deserve to eat, and we're going to continue advocating to get the food into the hands of people that need it.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Yeah, also for that personal side of the complexity of the policies you also shared with us. Thank you so much for that specificity and that story, as we've learned tonight we need. Last but not least, on a related subject, Christy Davis with Rural Kansas Development. So Christy, last but not least, and you can start putting questions in the chat so we can get to those. Or I'm sorry, questions in the Q&A.
I know folks have a lot of questions, so I'll try to keep it brief. It's never good to be the last person, but I'm a fifth generation Kansan. If you want to read a little bit about some of my experiences lately, I have a couple of articles that have been published in Kansas Reflector. I just recently finished a role with the Biden administration. I was a White House appointee as a USDA Rural Development Director for Kansas. I want to give a little bit about big picture and some effects at the state level. But then I want to focus a little bit on USDA, and I know Jessica talked a lot about the food programs. I'm not gonna rehash that. I want to focus on the rural development piece, which is very important to Kansas. So big picture, we did have about 16,000 federal employees in Kansas, huge contributors to the economy, and I want folks to know there's been a lot of emphasis, I think, on the number of federal employees in the Kansas City region, but as you all know, there's a lot of federal employees in Manhattan and also throughout the state. So far, if you're interested in looking at the current status of cuts to these federal agencies and number of federal employees, the New York Times keeps kind of a running tally on their website, so you can take a look there. According to their tally, and again, I'm sure they're struggling to keep up, but they have recorded approximately 75,000 buyouts. So 75,000 employees, federal employees who took the buyouts. So we're paying for these employees who are not in their roles at this time. and then at least 56,000 employees who've been cut since then. I want to mention really briefly some other federal agencies, that just the ones that haven't been mentioned so far. One of the programs that's been completely eliminated is IMLS. It's the Institute of Museum and Library Science. This is a federal agency that's been crucial in funding libraries. They've also provided a great deal of funding in the past to, for instance, the Kansas Historical Society, so museums and libraries nationwide. That agency has been completely eliminated, and I'll talk about the Kansas impacts of that. We talked about education. I'm going to just mention it again because I think it's really important for people to understand that rural communities get additional subsidies through Title I, but because there's an economy of scale when it comes to education. And in Kansas, we love our public schools, and they're play a huge role in our communities. These rural schools are already struggling, and they get about 10% of their budgets from the federal government. So just so folks know. The National Endowment for the Humanities, I think that Humanities Kansas has done a great job of educating folks about the impacts of losses to that program to them. $1.1 million of Humanities Kansas budget of 1.3 million comes from the National Endowment for Humanities, and those cuts will require that they eliminate programs. Again, they get a very small amount of funding, about $200,000 from state government. Part of that is because the state has to match it. So it's unclear what will happen if that federal funding is cut. There may not be, the state may not see a need to match or provide any kind of funding there. We talked about local food assistance. Just so folks know, the Kansas Department of Agriculture had a grant for $5 million for local food assistance that was passed through from the USDA, and that has been pulled. Well, this is one of the biggest problems that I see, is that we made promises to folks. The federal government made promises to folks, and people made decisions based on those promises, and these grants have been pulled. As far as USDA is concerned, folks, when they think about USDA, they think about production agriculture, right? And there's been a lot of talk about, commodities versus local production of food. Just so folks know, during the Biden administration, there was a huge emphasis on local foodways, because we all saw what happened during COVID when there were challenges with getting things distributed. For a century, we have really focused our farm policy on commodities in the United States because we've been feeding the world, right? We started doing that in particular during World War I. The whole farm economy was adjusted for that, was to shift those commodities. And so when you hear folks say, "Hey, farmers, you're lucky, we're going to put these tariffs on, and now you can just provide food for your local community." Well, the whole economy is not set up that way. At USDA in particular, as an overall organization, there's been a 6% reduction in employees, and that is a really big deal because USDA is a huge agency. Someone mentioned the Farm Bill. There are different titles in the Farm Bill. Farm Services Administration, there's different sub-agencies. 2% of the folks who live in rural America are engaged in production ag, or engaged in farming. What I did at USDA Rural Development really focused on the other 98% and also helped the 2% as well. So USDA, as you all know, we talked about SNAP and other things, there's so much more that USDA does than assist farmers. I will say, as it relates to that though, farmers, they do a pretty good job of standing up for themselves, and people understand farming. People have kind of a nostalgic idea of farming. They have great lobbyists. They have great advocates. Rural America can't afford a lobbyist. So that creates some challenges when it comes to the Farm Bill and some of these other programs, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. Just so folks are aware, Kansas has always played a huge leadership role when it comes to federal ag policy. And right now, Senator Marshall is on the Senate Ag Committee. Senator Moran, who was formerly on both the House and has been on the Senate Ag Committee, he is an ag appropriator. And so he plays a key role nationwide in this funding. And then Sharice Davids is on the House Ag Committee, but of course is in the minority party. USDA Rural Development, the program that I worked with, is a huge big deal. And the way USDA works is that they have had field offices throughout the country. And that's important because you all know in rural America, if you're not dealing with someone face to face, it doesn't happen. And the idea that you're going to have someone call Washington, D.C. for answers is just not tenable. They're not going to do it. There's barriers to communication. And I'm not talking just language, I'm talking semantics and just understanding of rural culture. At USDA Rural Development, our programs were split into different areas. Housing programs, which was huge. You know, we need housing. I think there's this idea on the coast that in rural America, you know, the populations are shrinking, so we must have a bunch of extra houses lying around or something. That is not the case. USDA Rural Development provides direct lending for housing. In the past has done a lot of multifamily housing. If you live in a rural community, it's likely that the multifamily housing you have is USDA multifamily housing. And then also loan guarantees. So we worked with lots of private banks to provide guarantees so that they would lend to projects that might be considered risky. And I'll tell you, most of the projects in rural America are. Again, you've got this economy of scale and they're a challenge. During the Biden administration, we invested $1.3 billion in Kansas for over 6,000 projects. And that's in addition to $140 million in Inflation Reduction Act money, and then $71 million in rural telecom. So people can live in rural communities when they have, you know, and work anywhere really if they have internet access. And so we invested heavily in telecommunications. That funding for the Inflation Reduction Act is a big deal because that's part of what's being clawed back. And I think someone mentioned a REAP project in their community. It may have been Marci. In their community, that program was funded through the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a program that's been around a while, but now they're pulling those funds. In general, with rural development, we have also had, let me back up. I mentioned housing. We also have community programs with rural development. Folks don't know this, but USDA is instrumental in financing and providing loan guarantees for all kinds of community projects, including hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, childcare, the kinds of projects that wouldn't happen in rural communities without some kind of government subsidy. So those programs are important. And then also helping rural businesses. You know, we work with a lot of, where we still have them, there's a handful of rural grocery stores in the state. A good bit of their money often goes to paying energy costs. And we had programs to help with that. Just things that people wouldn't think about, sustainable energy, that sort of thing. In general, rural development has been a bipartisan, you know, it's about one of the most bipartisan issues you can deal with. And Marci knows this at the state legislature level. When we've had programs for rural development at the state level, they receive wide support. One of the things that we did during the Biden administration was try to rebuild what was already dismantled during the first Trump administration. At one time in Kansas, we had 130 field people throughout the state helping people navigate just rural development programs. So for instance, when we had the tornado in Greensburg, USDA Rural Development was able to send a whole team there to just help them get through the paperwork so that they could apply for funding to rebuild their community. By the time I got there, after the first Trump administration, we were down to 30. And I was looking at the staff list today. I don't have specifics. I know who has reached out to me and said they've left. We were rebuilding, and so we were up over the 30 that we started with. We were rebuilding. They're back down to under 20 staff, and those are people who are supposed to be managing this these billions of dollars that Congress has already appropriated. That's important to remember. Congress holds the purse strings. They appropriated the funds. Those funds are part of the budget, and those programs are being dismantled. Where those programs still exist, the challenge is finding a staff person that can help you navigate it. And that's really what we've lost. And we started losing a lot of that during the first Trump administration. It's my understanding, looking at the New York Times data, that so far the federal government has rescinded 9,000 different grants. That's kind of a big deal. You know, you make a promise to folks and you say, here's this money, and they go make decisions based on that. Sometimes they go find other financing to help match that, and then the money gets pulled, and that's a problem. Jessica mentioned harvesters. Just to put this in perspective, in Kansas and Missouri, where they operate, because of cuts, they were expecting delivery of food. Recently, they didn't receive 2.4 million pounds of food that they were supposed to get. That's what we're talking about from a scale perspective. That's a lot. Another thing I want to mention as far as projects where we haven't been able to fulfill our promises, I worked closely. There was a PACE program that was funded through the Inflation Reduction Act, and it would allow us to coordinate with all rural electric co-ops throughout the state. I actually helped bring all of them to the table for one big project. We applied for $100 million. We actually got $100 million, and then one of the partners backed out. But we received a grant for $35 million for sustainable energy projects so that our rural electric co-ops could fund sustainable energy projects, solar, wind, and so forth. That project has been paused, and it's been a challenge, I think, to even, a lot of the people who were involved at the federal level aren't there anymore, and so that's one that's kind of up in the air. In addition, one of the other projects that is affected, just so folks know, the semiconductor plant in Coffee County that was meant to create 1,000 jobs. The idea of this funding was to make it so that we produce our own semiconductors and we're not reliant on China, right? So the idea was to bring manufacturing here. USDA was involved in $2 million worth of that project for the semiconductor plant. There's other federal and state money involved as well, and that's uncertain right now. Someone else mentioned REAP grants. That's another one where there's a challenge. So I want to stress that during the Biden administration, we understood the job of government efficiency, and we were using a scalpel to address it. I mean, I think I don't think anybody's going to try to tell you there isn't some waste in government, but among the things that we did, just in Topeka alone, with some changes to leases and consolidating leases while I was working in the Biden administration, we had about 500,000. We created about 500,000 per year in cost savings just in lease savings. I spent an entire year streamlining environmental review. And one way we did that was to get people on the ground in these field offices who could help people navigate them so that everyone could access these federal programs and they wouldn't get overwhelmed and back out. As part of that, I was able to get funding. I worked on this national effort to bring one of those people in for every state. And because those folks were many of those folks were on probation, those people were gone. And then we had Buy America, Build America. We were doing all kinds of things as far as, taking a scalpel to make those efficiencies. I did notice that DOGE is taking credit for all of the efficiencies that I made in my role during the Biden administration. But we mentioned tariffs and budgets. Again, it's Congress's job to appropriate the funds. One of the things that's been interesting to watch, I'll say interesting, is that, Congress had a leg to stand on, right? They had appropriated these funds and things were being pulled back. But now the budgets that are in consideration are aligned with the Trump administration. So we're in this weird realm where there's not a lot of checks and balances. If your budget aligns with it, you don't really have you don't have any leverage to say, hey, these programs are important. And that's been really interesting. In rural America in particular, where there's already a distrust for government, and we've spent so many years trying to rebuild that trust, these cuts are going to have impacts for generations. I mean, I live in a community of 900 people, and I live in Chase County, and it's already a place where they don't have a lot of faith in government programs anyway. We were beginning to see some of this, this trust rebuild, but now it's looking like, told you so, because the government is pulling back funds that have been awarded.
Hey, Christy, yeah, can we grab maybe a last point there so we can get to some of our questions?
I am on a last point.
Perfect.
I want to draw everybody's attention because it relates to all of this, to legislation and proposals to change judicial selection in Kansas for the Supreme Court, because it affects all of these things. If we don't have federal money, we're going to be putting more state money into programs like education, especially in rural areas. And those are the kinds of things that the judicial branch can provide the checks and balances for. So that's going to create a challenge. And then one other thing, I want to compliment Senator Moran, because you may have seen this. He has come out with reservations regarding tariffs, and also has had a lot to say as far as Medicaid and its impact on rural health, and the importance of Medicaid to keeping our hospitals open. So I think he has been listening, and I just want to make sure that folks know that he's sticking his neck out. He's one of a very few senators who is. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Christy. So that's a perfect segue. I wanted to show everyone one last slide here before we get to questions. One of the things that's been repeated by many of the folks on the call today is the importance of contacting your elected officials. So, of course, there's 2 senators from Kansas. Again, you can find all of this information online, but if you wanted to see it real quick, I put on here their Washington, D.C. office phone numbers. They all have offices, of course, in Kansas, and numerous locations too, where you can call and maybe go in and even meet up with folks. But you can call them, you can email them, you can visit their offices here and in various places in Kansas. And it's really important that you engage in that part of the process. You can't expect them to represent you if you don't engage and let them know that you support or oppose policies that are in place or that you'd like to see be added. So these are some contact information. And again, if you just search online, you can find their names and their offices. And back to what we were just hearing from Christy, I was in one of Senator Moran's offices just last week, and they were telling me that they have a meeting every week about who's called them and about what issues, and who's come into the office and who's emailed them, and that, that's stuff that they take into account, and they can't take that into account if you don't engage. So, okay, so now I'm going to get to some of the questions. So one of the things that several of you have talked about is the importance of stories, especially local stories, when you're contacting elected officials, and the power of those. Not even just to elected officials, but maybe even to your family members or friends or community members when you're talking about the importance of these issues. So do any of you have recommendations on where people can find stories of impacts on farmers, let's say, or impacts on educators, or impacts on our LGBTQ Kansans? So do you have any recommendations on where we can find stories to share and stories to, put with friends? So Jay, I think you had your hand up. So can you start maybe on an example?
Yeah, pardon me. The allergies always get me this time of year, so bear with me. I think the advice that I would give is that it's really important to find community events and to just put yourself in situations and around people that you might not know. I think one of the things that we lost during COVID, and I mean, not to anyone's fault, it was right for us to kind of hole up and do our social distancing and be, careful and healthy. But I think one of the things that we lost is this ability to create a larger sense of community. And I think that it's important that we at least get some of that back, because the more that you put yourself in situations where you have opportunities to hear new narratives, to hear new perspectives, to hear, about the stories that people want to share about themselves, I think that's really important. One thing that I always like to do, my degree was in music theater performance, so I like to go to different shows, I love the theater, I love music, and I just like going out in those spaces and socializing with people, and then I sprinkle in a little bit, oh yeah, I do the politics thing, here's how it's affecting me, blah blah blah. So sharing your own story in new spaces, and then also getting to know other people, just kind of widening your circle. I would, recommend political events as well as they come up, just like this. So
Thanks, Jay. Okay, so Brooklyn, your hand's up, and then after that, we'll go to Marci.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. So I'm going to drop in the chat, and you can share this with later on. So there is actually a Kansas Farmers Union Facebook group, and Nick Lewandowski is very good at sharing stories for like farmers and stuff. So I suggest anyone who's trying to keep up with what's going on in ag. I think he is a great resource. I use him because I sit on the ag committee in the Kansas legislature. So I think that Jake, following the Farmers Union Facebook page, if you're on social media, and I think that Marci could probably give you another resource, but I think that that is the best place if you're on social media to keep up with what's going on in ag. And he's also been on CNN a bunch of times, so there's clips with that. But he's been really good and a great resource when it comes to farmers' stories. So that's the best place that I like to go.
Wonderful resource. Thank you, Brooklyn. Marci, and then after that, we'll go to Christy.
So I did get my stories from Nick. But then I think the more personal you can make them, the better. So when I'm talking to somebody, I'm going to say, oh, we were out for a fundraiser at Z&M Twisted Vines. Here's what I've heard about what's happening to them. So the more that you can personally connect, the more I think impactful that story will be.
Awesome. Thank you, Marci. Christy, did you have something to add there too?
Yeah, really quickly, I agree. Just so folks know, I'm actually keeping track of all of the projects for which funds were appropriated and allocated for rural development projects in Kansas that have not yet been distributed. Because it's on me, right? I help these people access the funds, and I want to make sure that they get through the process. So if anybody's interested in particular with rural development projects and where they stand in your community, reach out, let me know where you are, and I can give you examples in your own community, because then you can turn around and talk to your elected officials with those examples from your community.
Christy, do you want to share like an email or a contact that you want people to have?
Sure, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Does anyone else have, maybe Brian or Angie or Jessica, do you have any other examples of ways people can get stories related to your issues in their community?
Absolutely. I would, oh, sorry, Angie, I didn't raise my hand. Bad etiquette. So I would say talk to teachers. I think our educators are pretty tired of non-educators, mainly those that are in Washington, deciding what it's like to be an educator, and deciding what those stories are. So particularly if you have kids or grandkids in the school system, go and just talk to them about the impact, or even if you don't. Schools are looking for volunteers all the time for you to be able to see firsthand of what some of those impacts are, and then sharing those stories. Because yeah, if we don't write our narrative, somebody will write the narrative for us, and being able to see those pieces. So.
And I'll just add on a little bit to Brian. Another group that I would really encourage you all to talk to are our classified staff. Talk to our paras, talk to our custodians. They often don't have a lot of the same rights in terms of bargaining power as our certified teachers. So they see the impacts. I'm not going to say more so than our certified educators, but they see a different side of those impacts. And particularly when we're talking about our paras, they see the impacts on individual students.
Awesome. Jessica, yeah, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say like an easy way to get involved in your community. We're talking about building community in this is volunteering, which you know, organizations like mine and schools and all across, you know, our state, places are looking for people to give a couple hours here and there. And there's a wide variety of what volunteering looks like. Um, I know though that like it that is how I've been able to build my community is around my organization, and it's good going to a place that shares a lot of the same values, and I think that's what a lot of people are craving right now, and finding organizations and places to give your time is a really easy way to start.
Thank you for that. Dena, I think you have some stuff to add too.
Yeah, just real quick. I would say don't overlook your own circle of friends. I think Kansans are notorious for maybe suffering in silence and not wanting to be in the spotlight. And sometimes they need a little nudging and maybe help them understand why it's important as far as the big picture is concerned. But I mean, we have our friends and neighbors are suffering in many different ways. So yeah, so I would say don't overlook your coffee group and folks you spend the most time with.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So another thing that you talked about is the chilling effect. I think that came up in a lot of the folks' comments. How, and there's some questions in the Q&A about, you know, like that seems intentional, right? Like it seems to be an effort to overwhelm, you know, all of these cuts simultaneously. How do you all think about that? And do you think about ways we can combat that? Which I do think someone said we've got to focus and conserve energy. But do any of you have thoughts about how we think about that? Yeah, so Brooklyn, do you want to start? And then Brian?
Yeah, so I think that if you listen to the artist formerly known as Steve Bannon, he talks about muzzle velocity and about like throwing things at people, throwing like, you know, he talks about like you do 3 big things a day, knowing that the media can only focus on one thing. Most people are going to crash out when they see all 3 of those things. So the one thing that I'm really leaning into, and to echo Jessica, who's doing great work at Just Food, is the community piece of it. I really lean on controlling the controllable. So I can't control the craziness that is happening in DC, but I can control what I do immediately in my community. So I do think that the big thing is making sure you're controlling the controllable, making sure that you are finding those, like you're taking care of your neighbors. And then also I think that the big thing is just the thing that they want us to do is to be exhausted. Like it is exhausting. I can look at me right now, like I am exhausted. It's 8:48. I'm like, I'm gonna be in bed by 9:30. I think that it's rest is a form of resistance. And I think that there's gonna be, I have really been pacing myself. Like I am an organizer by trade. Like that is what I've spent the last like decade of my life after the military doing. But I recognize that I cannot organize every single thing. So giving yourself the space to rest, giving yourself the space to, like, I find myself to be a leader, like I've learned to follow in a lot of cases. So rest, controlling the controllable, and then like don't let the bastards grind you down. So I think that for me is like really turning into my community and making sure that I am doing the most that I can in my community.
Thank you so much for that, Brooklyn. Brian, and then we'll go to Jay.
Yeah. So I think that this goes really hand in hand with the previous question of telling the stories and just really communicating and talking to others. This administration, one of their go-to is to take all of the buzzwords and attach them to an issue to get people riled up, even when it's nonsensically attached. For example, with education, we hear all the time as the defense for why the Department of Ed is going away is because with the Department of Ed away, then your school districts won't have to teach these radical DEI things. Okay, well, first of all, that's not happening. But more importantly, it's not even a control of the Department of Ed. Curriculum is a local decision. And someone saying that getting rid of the Department of Ed frees up a district to be able to have more control over their curriculum, we have that anyway. And the more that you talk with other individuals in your community and you hear their stories, you hear the rhetoric you need to counteract all of the crazy rhetoric that's coming from DC with your own narrative that kind of levels things out. So
Yeah, thanks so much for that. Jay, yeah, can you expand?
Yes. So one thing that I realized that I was doing just a few years into like my advocacy, this is like kind of when Biden was the president. And like, if you didn't know, like a lot of my generation fell for a lot of online rhetoric. I'm a Gen Z. And I just feel like every time I try to talk to someone about the Democratic Party or the things that Biden was doing, so many people in our country have lost the view of the good that's happening. Like, and we fall for these talking points that we see online. God knows where they're coming from, right? And we think, oh, well, everything is terrible. There's nothing we can do. And so we disengage, right? I think it's really important, and I think I mentioned this earlier, to be concise and to be focused about the efforts that you have. I know that Brooklyn just talked about this, choosing 3 big things that you do or 1 big thing, you know. It's really important to allow the things that we choose to do, and like that's driven by an understanding of the impact and an understanding of reality. So often, like I said before, I see people just falling for things that they read online. And that has gotten so bad nowadays, especially like I don't want to bash on the internet too much because it's also an effective organizing tool if you use it the right way. But we have to be hypercritical about where we're getting our information and what we're using it to do. Because, you know, I talked about watching the state legislature, watching C-SPAN. I ask a lot of people, when's the last time you sat through an entire committee hearing in either your state or the federal government? When's the last time you actually informed your actions and your understanding of things by simply putting yourself in a position to know exactly what you're talking about? If you want to read the buzzwords and you want to see everything that's going on, fine. But I really just think it's time for us to get back to our roots of actually organizing and knowing what we're talking about and being precise in the data that we're giving other people. Because a powerful part of this narrative building and this storytelling that we're talking about is making sure that it's genuine, right? We want to make sure that yes, we're you know, spreading our view of things, but that we're doing it with facts and evidence and things that are going to allow other people to completely understand where we're coming from. That's been something that's really bugging me lately, like as an activist. Like I see people in my generation just say, oh, well, Biden this, Biden that. I'm like, you know what? Like he also did this and this and this, and we just need to be more understanding about kind of where we're coming from with our ideas. Because yes, progress is needed, especially as it seems like our country is going backwards. But progress also doesn't take like a 5-second snap of the fingers. It's step by step by step. That's how they're dismantling our country. And so we need to be just as diligent in building our country back up, in taking baby steps and really doing the work to understand what's going on and how we can combat it.
Thank you so much for saying that, Jay. As we're about out of time here, I know we've taken a lot of people's times, but I want to end with some parting thoughts that I think sum up a lot of the things that everyone was just saying. And I should say I'm a historian by trade, so keep that in mind. I'm an educator as well. So one thing Brooklyn mentioned, and several of you have talked about, is the importance of returning to community, the importance of knowing where you are and who's around you. You know, if you have children in a local school system, knowing the people in that building, right, or the school board in your town, even if you don't have children in the school system, right, those are important structures. And many communities this year, it's school board election time, right? So these are the kinds of things you can influence. Speaking about that, I would encourage everyone to engage, but I would say engage collectively, because it's very hard to feel like you're making a difference by yourself. So a lot of the folks here are part of organizations, right? Whether it's Democratic parties or KNEA, or they represent constituencies. You can volunteer to be a part of some, right? Just Food would love to see your labor and help them get through this very challenging time. Women for Kansas would love for you to join us at any of our meetings, our virtual meetings, which you can learn about on our website and our socials. But I just like everyone else here, I can't do it all, but I can do my part like I'm doing today. But if I miss some other things, the people in my group are getting that, or they're helping me remember, or they're telling me, because maybe I was taking a nap while some big old thing happened and they're going to help me know, right? So engaging collectively expands the influence you can make. You can write letters to your senators together. I went with Women for Kansas people when I went to Senator Moran and Marshall's office last week because it was easier to do together. It's more fun to do together, and it makes a better impression on the folks there in that office. You can travel to do those together. You can call together. Those are things you can do. And then this might be a hard thing to accept. But as you know, in many parts of our history, many people have worked over decades and in some cases centuries to accomplish really important things. And this might be hard, but what if we could get to the place where right now we could be grateful that it's our time to save democracy. It's our time to take care of our neighbors. It's our time to advocate for everyone in our community and ensure that equality is experienced by all, democracy is experienced by all. So I wonder if we could find it in ourselves to say it's our time and be grateful to take that action. Have the courage to know that we can do this, and we are glad that we're here to do it together. So speaking of that, I'm glad you were here with us today. Again, Women for Kansas is so grateful to everyone who was on the panel. I learned so much. I know the people listening did. Again, if there's anything you missed or stuff you want to see again, we're going to post this on YouTube. And we are so grateful. There's so many subjects also that are important that we did not get to today, or we did not have panelists to speak about. So watch for more Women for Kansas events to talk about more subjects that are important and how federal policy changes are impacting us. And let's give a great round of applause for our panelists, and thank you so much. And everyone, go get some rest. Bye.